Morning all. Dozens of people remain missing this morning and rivers and lakes dangerously high. After severe flooding across parts of Europe, the latest figures have just arrived. 92 people are now known to have died in Germany and Belgium after swollen rivers caused a wave of debris through towns and villages. 6 people are missing in Turkey, and in Switzerland, Lake Lucerne is close to bursting its banks. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel has called it a catastrophe. Well, one of the worst affected areas is the village of Schuld in western Germany, where a row of houses collapsed. From there, our Europe correspondent Michelle Clifford reports.
In western Germany, the army have been brought in to deal with the aftermath of the devastating floods. Residents in Hagen forced to flee their homes after the River Volm burst its banks. The sheer force of the floods swept away anything in their path. In Altena, locals watched on, unable to do anything as floodwaters streamed down their streets.
Oh, nein!
The village of Schuld is among the hardest hit. Several homes have collapsed here, and the village is among many with no power and very difficult to access.
Overnight they were upstairs and it was dark because there was no light, no power.
Chancellor Angela Merkel, on a farewell visit to Joe Biden in Washington, described the situation as a catastrophe.
Ich traue die in dieser Katastrophe ihr Leben verloren haben.
I grieve for those who have lost their lives in this disaster. We still don't know the number, but it will be many. Some in the basements of their homes, some as firefighters were trying to bring others to safety. And to their loved ones, my deepest sympathies.
Tief empfundene Anteilnahme.
Across Europe, record rainfall has caused some of the worst flooding in decades. In eastern Belgium, rivers burst their banks and cascaded through towns and cities. Homes and livelihoods destroyed in an instant.
Luckily, I have my sister, but now we've been told that our house could collapse, and so we've had to leave.
In Pepinster, some residents had to be rescued on the back of trucks. Much of the town of Valkenburg in southeast Netherlands has been left underwater too. Homes and businesses inundated, and the fear remains of more rain in the coming days. In Turkey, a major rescue operation is underway after flash floods and landslides in the Black Sea province of Rize. Authorities say many villages are cut off and impossible to reach. And the Swiss city of Lucerne is on high alert, with its lake just centimetres from bursting its banks. Sandbags and inflatable flood barriers are being put in place as the water continues to rise.
The reason for the installation of the inflatable flood barriers was that some forecasts said that the lake level is going to continue to rise and that the magic limit will be reached.
In many parts of western Germany, rescue services are still searching for those missing, feared swept away by the floods. And the rescue work continues as the rain keeps falling. Michelle Clifford, Sky News, Germany.
Now, England's chief medical officer has warned that we could get into trouble again, surprisingly fast, in the fight against COVID-19. Professor Whitty, one of the Prime Minister's main advisers, was speaking during a live stream event just days before restrictions in England are relaxed.
We are not by any means out of the woods yet on this, in much better shape due to the vaccine programme and drugs and a variety of other things. But this has got a long way to run in the UK, and it's got even further to run globally. What we really need to do, all of us, is take things incredibly slowly. I would reiterate that now. I don't think we should underestimate the fact that we could get into trouble again surprisingly fast.
Joining us now on the programme, Lucy Fraser, Solicitor General for England and Wales. Ms Fraser, very good morning to you.
Ms Fraser, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Given that which we just heard from Professor Whitty, given the infection rates, given the hospitalisation rates, are you still comfortable with the great unlocking that is coming on Monday?
Well, you're right that infection rates are still rising, but the situation we're in at the moment is that around 80% of people have had their first vaccine, and over 2/3 have had their second vaccine. And we know that we have weakened the link between the infection rates, the hospitalisations and deaths. And so now is a good time to loosen those restrictions, because if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it?
Well, perhaps in a few weeks' time, when more people have been vaccinated.
Well, we did wait. You will remember we were meant to be opening up on June the 21st, but the government made the decision to delay that to enable more people to be vaccinated. And we've beaten the target that we set for those second vaccinations by a week. And so now we are moving from legal restrictions to people taking personal responsibility. So when we are saying to people, do continue to be cautious, do take measures, but now we are just taking away those legal restrictions because of the success of the vaccine programme.
But let's just dwell just for a second on that which we heard from, none other than the Chief Medical Officer. Chris Whitty said this: I don't think we should underestimate the fact that we could get into trouble again surprisingly fast. Things could look a lot worse in 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks' time. That's the Chief Medical Officer saying, in essence, that in a little over a month we could see restrictions coming back in, isn't it?
Well, he did say that matters could escalate, and of course that is true. But he also said, let's look at where we have come from, and let's look at also that we're not in the same place that we were when restrictions first went in. We have the vaccination programme, we have the genomic sequencing to detect new strains, we have the test and trace system, we are fully stocked with PPE and all those other things that we just didn't have when restrictions came in place. And the key to all this has been the vaccination programme, because we know that you're much less likely to get a severe illness if you are double vaccinated.
Sure, but I'll repeat the question. Chris Whitty saying, in 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks' time, we may need to look at things again. That is the Chief Medical Officer saying that in England, in a little over a month, we could see a return to restrictions, isn't it?
Well, I think the Health Secretary has been very clear, as has the Prime Minister, that we will see infections rise. But the reason why the restrictions are being taken away is because of the vaccination programme, which will protect people when those infection rates do rise. And of course, if we get into a situation where it's unacceptable and we do need to put back further restrictions, then that, of course, is something the government will look at. But, we're going into the summer. A large number of people have been vaccinated. We've had a really tough time. We're still asking people to take responsibility. And we do need to ask ourselves, if we don't open up now, when will we be able to open up?
Yeah, as you say, Ms. Fraser, we are asking people to exercise their own judgment. We're asking people to go slowly. But we've got 140,000 people pitching up at Silverstone this weekend.
Well, there are some large events, and of course there are measures in relation to those large events. But what I've seen over the course of the last year is people taking a huge amount of personal responsibility, not always just abiding by the rules, but going beyond the rules. I've seen people, outside wearing masks where they don't have to, and there are different restrictions in different places for different reasons, and of course the measures will be changing on next Monday.
I just wonder if we can dwell just for a moment on the COVID app. The NHS app pinged 520,194 people in the week leading up to July the 7th. That's not sustainable, is it? We're already beginning to see businesses complaining about the fact that production lines are, in essence, literally grinding to a halt.
Well, I understand people's frustration in relation to that, but we must remember it is an important tool, the self-isolation tool. But we have already announced, of course, that on August the 16th, again, the measures will change. And if you are fully vaccinated, you won't have to isolate, but instead take a test
Sure, but that is a month away, and we're not yet even at, as ministers have stopped calling it, but they used to, Freedom Day. We're 4 days away from Monday. The only thing that is going to happen when we relax restrictions is that more people will be getting pinged. 500,000 in the week to July the 7th. One wonders what it's going to be in a couple of weeks' time, perhaps reaching into the millions.
Well, as I said, it is an important tool because it is important that you do isolate if you've come into contact. I know this is something the government is looking at. In addition to the changes in mid-August, the government is also carrying out a number of pilots to see whether instead of isolating once you get pinged, you could take a test. So the government is looking at this very, very carefully, recognising the significant impact that is having on businesses.
Medical experts in the British Medical Journal have been pretty scathing about the plans for July the 19th. They've claimed that the government's strategy of, as they describe it, infection over vaccination, unethical and unscientific. I just wonder if you have a response to the BMJ describing the government's strategy as, again, unethical and unscientific.
Well, the government acts basing its decisions, its political decisions, based on scientific evidence. And what it's seen in this period coming up to July the 19th is that although infection rates are rising, the link between infections, hospitalizations and death is weakening. So if I give you some recent statistics, we recently, I believe this is yesterday, but the numbers might be slightly off, we had around 40,000 infections. We had around 500 hospitalizations and around 50 deaths. So there is, of course, all those hospitalizations are of concern, and even more so the deaths, but there is a significant difference between the number of infections and the translation into hospitalizations and deaths.
Well, actually, I mean, you were correct. I mean, the figures have changed slightly from that. Rather than 40,000, it was almost 50,000 new cases yesterday, the highest since January the 15th. Rather than 500 hospital admissions, as you said, it was 621. We've got 3,241 beds occupied compared with 2,209 last Wednesday. Things are getting bad very, very quickly, as Chris Whitty said.
I don't think that the Health Secretary has suggested anything otherwise than the infection rate is going to rise. And as a consequence of the infection rate rising, that means, because there is a link between the two, that it follows that hospitalizations and deaths will rise as well. But there are also consequences to not opening up, real consequences, not just to people's jobs and the economy, but to mental health as well. Also to people who haven't been going to the doctor because they fear it. There is and so it is really important that we get the balance right between ensuring that we keep this virus under control and we take the necessary clinical measures to do that, but that we also recognise there are consequences of not opening up and not allowing people to go about their daily lives.
Ms Fraser, we do appreciate you taking so much time to speak on stuff that is technically away from your brief. I just wonder if we can move it slightly closer to it. The statute of limitations that is being introduced to deal with prosecutions relating to actions during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. All 5 political parties in Northern Ireland are opposed to this. The Irish government is opposed to this. Provisionals on both sides are opposed to this. Is it time for a rethink?
So the issue in relation to this is that as time moves on, the chances of getting successful convictions gets lower. And I know that this issue is causing a lot of issues in Ireland, and it is important that we engage on this subject. And the rifts are developing, and I know that the government is engaging with all parties. It will continue to do so before it brings forward any legislation.
Lucy Fraser, great to have you on the programme this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Still to come this morning at past, I'll be speaking to Adam Finn, a member of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, on the rollout of this year's flu vaccine. Can you help research how climate change has affected butterflies in Britain. A conservation expert, Dr. Zoe Randall, joins us at 1:45 to talk about the big butterfly count. And at 8:30, we'll be speaking to a club owner ahead of the reopening of England's nightclubs on Monday. Now, rape victims are being denied justice because of a blame culture between police and prosecutors, according to a report from official inspectors. It says there's deep division and finger-pointing between the different agencies. Well, the Crown Prosecution Service estimates that there are 128,000 victims of rape and attempted rape a year, but as you can see, only 1.6% of reported cases result in a charge. Figures for 2019-20 show 1,439 suspects were convicted of rape or lesser offences in England and Wales last year. It is the lowest level since records began, despite reports of adult rape to police almost doubling since 2015-16. Our correspondent, Ivor Bennett, joins us now from the newsroom. Ivor, distressing report.
Yeah, absolutely. A damning indictment even of the way rape cases are handled. And it was done by the watchdogs for policing and prosecution. And they found that there is tension, basically, between those two agencies, with each one blaming the other for those astonishingly low conviction rates. It also found that there is what it called a more cautious attitude when it comes to investigating and prosecuting rape compared to other alleged offences. And all of this means that the response from the criminal justice system as a whole, it says, often lacks focus, clarity and commitment. It doesn't get much worse.
Sorry, Ivor, I think you might need to hit your microphone with a hammer. There's a problem with the sound. We'll come back to you and discuss a little bit more later on today. But let's bring you a few of the other stories of the morning. Several people have been injured after a tornado hit parts of the Canadian province of Ontario. The city of Barrie was worst affected, and officials say 4 people have been seriously injured. Several buildings are said to have been destroyed, with many others left uninhabitable. The government will today reveal how the flu jab will be rolled out alongside a possible COVID booster. Many experts fear that there could be far more cases of flu this winter because so many people have stayed away from crowded places during lockdown. It is a week until the opening of the delayed 2020 Olympics, and we're being told to expect a very different sort of games in Japan. Tokyo is under a state of emergency following an increase in coronavirus cases, hitting a 6-month high, in fact. Our sports correspondent, Tom Parmenter, reports.
This is their games. Karate making its debut, Japan hosting the world. But rather than celebrating the back of the pandemic, Tokyo is still fighting it. And it's already snatched away their chance to take part.
I'm so sad.
Welcome to Japan, home to the world's biggest experiment in the time of a pandemic. There's pre-departure tests, tracking apps, paperwork, saliva tests. It's a good safety net, but it can never be perfect. And the Japanese know it. Their recovery games are being held under a state of COVID emergency.
The Olympics should be a symbol of unity and peace. And, the Prime Minister said it's a symbol of victory over the COVID pandemic. But unfortunately, it's becoming totally opposite.
Team GB are games ready, but the athletes are going it alone. No family, no friends here watching the moments that could define their lives.
They were going to come out, so not having them here is kind of a bit disappointing, but at the same time, I think it's the right call. I know that they're all going to be at home watching me.
As it stands, 375 athletes will be in the Team GB bubble, and they have to maintain it.
As we know, quick outbreaks of the COVID variant, it can bring teams down, it can bring delegations down quite quickly, but we're not in that position.
The hard reality is that nobody can guarantee how these games will pan out. There are always problems, there are always worries before any Olympic Games, but this does genuinely feel different. We know that the Olympic spirit can achieve extraordinary things, but can it overcome COVID? Japan has been racing to improve its slow vaccination rate. just 20% of people are protected.
Shoot up, finish.
They can't afford a super-spreading event, but many fear one is just beginning. The Games are on. As one Olympic official has said, only Armageddon will stop it now. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Tokyo.
And the luckiest man at Sky News does join us now live from Tokyo. Good to see you, Tom. Of course, you will be able to watch the sport up close and personal. For those of us like me who are just going to be watching through the television screens, will we notice much of a difference?
Well, you move around Tokyo, but you can't really move around at the moment because we are under very tight restrictions for the first 14 days that we are here. So I'm on the 28th floor of our balcony at the moment and we can't move about freely. But that is because this situation that we are all in. This should be one of the most exciting moments for any host nation, with all these extraordinary human beings flying in to show the world what they can do. But the infection rates are over 1,000 a day. That's the highest rate in Tokyo since January. That is a big deal. The figures aren't as high as we have in the United Kingdom, but they are very high for Japan, and there is a great deal of concern. We will see later today further protests in Tokyo, still calling for the cancellation of the Games. And we know already that 30 positive cases have been picked up in the first couple of weeks of people coming in, participants of the Games, whether they are athletes or media or part of the support staff that need to be here to make an Olympic Games happen. Well, 30 cases so far, and the organisers will publish that daily data of the number of COVID cases, and I think that will be watched just as closely as the medals table when the sport finally gets underway. The organisers here are walking somewhat of a tightrope in the next days and weeks. They know that things could change, and that, of course, is one of the lessons of the pandemic, isn't it? We all know how quickly things can change, and there's no reason to think why that won't happen in the 32nd Olympic Games, but an Olympic Games like the kind of which we've never seen before.
Tom, enjoy yourselves, and we'll be speaking a lot more over the coming weeks. Thanks very much indeed. Now, as we were reporting just a couple of minutes ago, rape victims are being denied justice because of a blame culture between police and prosecutors, according to a report from the official inspectors. Let's return to Sky's Ivor Bennett joining us from the newsroom. Ivor, take us through this report. The culture of blame, frankly, is going to annoy an awful lot of people here.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully you can hear me this time. The culture of blame is what is at the heart of things, it seems, when it comes to these low conviction rates, with police and prosecution blaming each other for those dismally low rates that this report talks of. It also found a more cautious attitude when it comes to investigating and prosecuting rape compared to other alleged offences. And all of it means that the collective response from the criminal justice system as a whole, in the words of the report, often lacks focus, clarity and commitment. It doesn't get much worse than that. How can things improve? Well, there are several recommendations, including more consistent wraparound care for rape victims. Campaigners are calling for specialist training for police and prosecutors, while the report says there is an urgent and fundamental shift needed in the way rape cases are handled. That call for a wholesale change, though, is nothing new. This report comes only a month after the government published its own rape review, in which it, as well as apologising to rape victims, it also set out plans for a culture and system change. What's new that's come to light with this report, though, is these tensions between police and prosecutors, and until that blame culture is eradicated, it says, change is unachievable.
Ivor, many thanks indeed. Time for us, as always, to check in and see how the weather is looking as we nudge towards the weekend. Naz is standing by. Morning, Naz.
Good morning. Lots of sunshine on the cards as high pressure builds in, and temperatures are on their way up. We could see highs of 30 Celsius or more for the first time this year, and in fact, since September 2020.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. High pressure will be building in and temperatures are on their way up, with plenty of sunshine to be expected out there for the rest of this week as well, but not everywhere. Across the northwest of Scotland, in fact, this morning, it is cloudy, it's cool, it's murky, there's some drizzle there, and there's a fair amount of cloud across parts of Ireland and Northern Ireland, as well as across some eastern parts of England too. But elsewhere, it's a mostly dry, sunny and mild start for this morning. And we'll see most of that cloud clear away from eastern England. And there will be some good spells of sunshine developing widely across many areas. A little bit of fair weather cloud may bubble up across parts of Ireland, Northern Ireland, perhaps for central and northwestern parts of England and Wales. But it's fair weather cloud, so it will still be mainly dry and sunny across these parts and widely warm, particularly down towards southwest. But northwest Scotland, cloudy, cool, murky and drizzly there.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, a herd of wild Asian elephants have been caught taking time out to have a little bit of fun. The adrenaline rush of sliding down a hill proved too great for the herd in southwest China. And they'd been trapped in a much smaller area of the province, so when they got their chance, they took it, whatever the cost, to the crops that they trampled. Still to come, will this year's flu jab be part of a COVID booster programme? We'll be discussing that next. Welcome back. The government will look at reimposing COVID restrictions if the numbers of infections continue to rise and those case numbers become unacceptable. The Solicitor General, Lucy Fraser, was responding to comments from England's Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, who warned that case numbers could rise surprisingly fast when restrictions in England are relaxed on Monday.
We are not by any means out of the woods yet on this, in much better shape due to the vaccine programme and drugs and a variety of other things. But this has got a long way to run in the UK, and it's got even further to run globally. What we really need to do, all of us, is take things incredibly slowly. I would reiterate that now. So I don't think we should underestimate the fact that we could get into trouble again surprisingly fast.
The reason why the restrictions are being taken away is because of the vaccination programme, which will protect people when those infection rates do rise. And of course, if we get into a situation where it's unacceptable and we do need to put back further restrictions, then that, of course, is something the government will look at. I don't think that the Health Secretary has suggested anything otherwise than the infection rate is going to rise. And as a consequence of the infection rate rising, that means, because there is a link between the two, that it follows that hospitalisations and deaths will rise as well. But there are also consequences to not opening up, real consequences, not just to people's jobs and the economy, but to mental health as well. Also to people who haven't been going to the doctor because they fear it. There is and so it is really important that we get the balance right.
As you can see, joining us in the studio, our political correspondent, Rob Powell. Morning, Rob. Do you know, I'm old enough to remember when people were describing the relaxation taking place on Monday as irreversible.
Yeah, well, it was only a few weeks ago when Sajid Javid came in as Health Secretary, and he was very, very bullish, no going back, although, to be fair, he was talking about lockdowns there. But he certainly came in with a tone that suggested that July the 19th, restrictions away, maybe some guidance, but we're not going back there, essentially. The tone in a matter of a few weeks seems to have shifted. And I thought Lucy Fraser almost rowing in behind Chris Whitty there in terms of saying, if the situation gets to an unacceptable point, then we'll look at restrictions again. The big question, though, that no one really has answered in government is what actually is unacceptable? At what point do hospitalisations have to reach before they look at restrictions? How many people have to catch COVID and potentially get long COVID before they look at doing something? And all of this, of course, comes at a point where we are 4 days out from legal restrictions being lifted. As you pointed out, hundreds of thousands of people going to Silverstone for the F1 this weekend. So this is a critical point. And I think there's also a big question mark over what exactly life looks like after July the 19th. It is not the sort of day of freedom parroted by some, because it's clear that medics at least want us to sort of ingratiate all of the rules we've been living under for the last 15 months or so and still live by them. Hands, face, space, ventilated areas, meeting people outside. And then there's the app as well, with increasing numbers of people being forced to stay at home, even though there are no legal restrictions on that. So I think not quite the sort of sense of freedom after July the 19th that some may have hoped for, but also a big question mark about whether in just a matter of weeks we could be looking at restrictions again.
Indeed. Rob, for now, thanks very much. But as always, let's take a look at the latest set of COVID-19 data. In the latest 24-hour period, 48,553 new cases of coronavirus have been reported, along with 63 more deaths. Now, that's the highest number of daily deaths since April the 9th, and it takes the total of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test to, well, you can read it there, 128,593. What are vaccinations? Well, just over 60,000 first jabs were given yesterday, while more than 185,000 people received their second. It means 35.3 million people are now fully inoculated against COVID-19. As we were discussing with the Solicitor General, vaccines are, of course, weakening the link between infections and hospitalisations. At the same stage in the second wave in early autumn, the ratio of cases to hospital admissions was 3 times higher than it is now. And the ratio of cases to deaths, well, that was around 7 times higher. Plans for this year's flu jab programme will be unveiled later today. It's thought that the scheme could be set up alongside a booster for COVID vaccines. Very pleased to say, joining us now on the programme, Professor Adam Finn, a member of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. Professor Finn, great to see you this morning. For those of us without the academic qualifications that you possess, just explain exactly why influenza could be such an issue this coming autumn and winter.
Well, Neil, the truth is that we see epidemics of influenza every winter, with one exception, and that was last winter. The restrictions that were in place before and during the second wave were sufficient to stop influenza from being passed around almost entirely. And as a consequence of that, we actually are really concerned that we might see a much bigger epidemic of flu this year, simply because all of the immunity that that epidemic would have created, it doesn't exist. So that if you have then a coincidence of a big flu epidemic and a further wave of COVID, that doubles the pressure on the health service and means that we're in a much more vulnerable place. And flu, of course, is not the only virus that affects us in the winter. There are others as well. And they similarly may come back charging in and cause problems.
Of course, Professor, we will need to wait for the announcement to know the specifics of the vaccination programme. But in general terms, it does feel like the net will be cast more widely. There will be more people encouraged to take a flu vaccination this year than ever before. For those who have not taken one in the past, but who are perhaps recommended to do so, what advice would you give them? What words would you use to encourage them to do something that they've not needed to do before, or felt that they haven't needed to do before?
Yes, I think you're right that we're quite likely to see an extended flu vaccine program this year. For many, many years, we've been offering vaccine to the over 65s, as well as people who have underlying comorbidities, other illnesses that make them more likely to get seriously ill with flu. And we've also had a program in younger children, children preschool age and in primary schools. And we've been gradually increasing the age upwards of the children who've been receiving flu vaccine. So I think we'll see the age, the lower age of the elderly come down probably to 50 years, and also the pediatric program for kids to go up a bit. So in answer to your question, I think the one thing that we're all familiar with now is getting vaccinated because of the COVID vaccine. And this is really a very similar story. Flu is actually a more serious illness than COVID in some respects, certainly in children. And combined with COVID, it's going to cause real problems. So the reasons for getting immunized are to avoid getting sick with flu, and as with the COVID program, to avoid infecting your family, your contacts, your work colleagues with flu as well. So it's really a repeat of the experience we've all had over the last 6 months with the COVID program, but with the flu program as well. And I hope what we'll see is, at least in some cases, that we can give both vaccines to people at the same time, making the whole thing more efficient.
Professor, I suspect a couple of people might just have had a little choke on their cornflakes there. Just explain in a little bit more detail why, as you just said, in some ways, influenza could be worse than COVID-19.
Well, certainly in children, we don't really see serious illness from COVID at all. I mean, they can clearly get the infection, but very, very few of them get seriously ill, certainly not healthy children. That's not the case for flu, actually. We see in younger children, we have significant numbers of hospitalizations and even some deaths every year from flu. So for children, flu is very definitely a worse illness than COVID. In older people, of course, we don't usually see the numbers of deaths that we've been seeing with COVID, but we do see thousands of deaths every year from influenza, predominantly in older people and to some extent in people with underlying conditions. And that's why we have the annual flu program. And the number of those deaths varies quite widely from year to year, according to the strain of flu that circulates. So if we get a particularly large and particularly bad flu epidemic this year, we could be seeing thousands of deaths from flu. Now, combine that with the other viruses and further COVID, you've really got a serious problem on your hands.
A slightly different topic, but of course, everything relaxes, well, a lot of things relax come next Monday. Given what we heard from Chris Whitty yesterday, that we could find ourselves in an awful lot of trouble, basically within the next couple of months, are you entirely relaxed about what will be taking place on Monday? I can't imagine you're going clubbing, but I'm wondering just what you think about the broader relaxation. Perhaps you are.
No, clubbing's not really part of my lifestyle these days. Yes, I think I've been saying consistently that people should probably be quite careful about the relaxation of regulations. I've been asked a number of times in different interviews about mask wearing, and I've been consistent in saying that I personally will continue to use a mask indefinitely, particularly if I have symptoms, in order to protect other people, particularly in closed spaces and so on. I think what we're hearing and seeing here is a readjustment in the rhetoric, partly because of the continuing rise in number of cases, and this is a balancing act that we've got going on at the moment, and partly also in reflection of the fact that it seems clear that a quite large proportion of the public are actually very concerned about the relaxation. It's not as though everyone's throwing their hands up with glee and saying, thank goodness it's all over, and people are recognizing that it's not all over and that things are still really quite dangerous out there. So I think there's a political readjustment to that reality and that public attitude. So I think, yes, things should go carefully and we need to keep things under control. We're still in a position of really quite high uncertainty about what the next few weeks holds. And in the context of uncertainty, caution is always a good approach.
Certainly is. Professor Finn, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, time to find out what's happening in the sport. Rob is standing by. Rob, what you got for us?
Good morning. Well, already some action for golf fans to enjoy today. Round 2 of the Open has begun, and it is a former winner who leads the way.
This sports bulletin is brought to you by Vitality, committed to getting 100 million people 20% more active by 2025.
At the age of 6, I had meningitis, septicemia, and they said I'd never walk again. My Achilles in my left leg shrunk, so that meant that sort of my knees weren't in line with my hips. So they said that I'd constantly have problems with that. A year and a half later, I started going outside. I was back walking, running, and then I got signed for QPR, age 8. So yeah, it's a miracle really that I was being able to walk and run again.
How did you go from struggling to walk to being able to run around and be able to play with the kids? But the kids were really good at football.
Both my legs were in plaster for about 6 months. I was in a wheelchair. I can't remember exactly how I started walking again, but I used to have to wear like night splints. So my legs were constantly in splints to help me walk. Mentally, when I come out of hospital, I was like a different child. My mum said it wasn't the same child that went into hospital. I had brain damage from it, and I was on life support for 6 days. I've got obviously ADHD, I was diagnosed, OCD, personality disorder. I've got a few things. So that, as well as sort of playing football, was a massive sort of risk. I was lonely. I felt like at a very lonely place with this injury now. Beforehand, I was constantly on a high. I always thought I will get through whatever I go through, and that's the way I do see it, because I do. Whatever I go through, I do get through eventually. And it sort of proved that I do. But I'm driven to really do well, and I don't want to let myself down. My last game I played was on the 20th of January 2020. I've started to feel really unwell, and I felt like my throat was swelling. I remember going to bed and waking up, and I thought I was dying. I remember sitting there on the end of the bed and sort of saying, sorry.
It's okay.
I remember saying to the nurse, like, my mental health was bad and this has really, really topped it off. And she got sort of a woman to come around and speak to me. And the woman, I know she was trying to help. She was saying, doesn't matter about football, like you can take another journey. And I remember sitting there thinking,
committed to getting 100 million people 20% more active by 2025.
Rob, thanks very much. Still to come in the programme, we'll be finding out how we can support our country's butterfly population. And the expert Dr. Zoe Randall. That's next.
Anger at the police, anger at the government.
It was from this chamber that Carlos Puigdemont declared independence in October.
I want to show other people what happened.
I'm Michelle Clifford and I'm Sky's Europe correspondent. It's not the aim of the smugglers to actually get people to UK shores, but simply into British waters. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. There are real concerns here now about whether the health system will be able to cope. Made by people who dare to challenge. Afternoon, Mr. Barnier.
I have no time for any polemics.
I'm Tom Cheshire, and I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing.
Did you know symptoms of hay fever can develop at any stage of life, not just in childhood? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Plenty of sunshine is expected today and it'll be widely warm and dry too. However, northwest Scotland will be cloudy with some patchy drizzle and coastal parts of the east may remain rather cloudy and cool. Pollen levels will be high or very high for most places today, but moderate across the north of Scotland. We are currently in the peak of the grass and spore season and weed pollen is at a medium risk.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Now, butterfly numbers have been hit hard by extreme weather, leaving conservation groups suggesting that they've been badly affected by climate change. The organisers of the Big Butterfly Count want people across the country to be adding up the number that they see in their gardens or parks. Very pleased to say we're joined by Dr. Zoe Randall, the Senior Surveys Officer at Butterfly Conservation, and she's joining us now from Magdalen Hill Down Nature Reserve in Winchester. We got there. Dr. Randall, good to see you this morning. Explain for your viewers, if you can, the thinking behind the Big Butterfly Count.
Well, we want as many people as possible to take part in the Big Butterfly Count, which runs for the next 3 weeks. You simply go out and choose a sunny spot and count the number of butterflies you see in a 15-minute period, and then submit those counts via the smartphone app or the website. And your data can help us understand what's happened to our butterfly populations with the cold spring that we've had.
What is the current thinking as to what is happening with the butterfly population? We suggested a second ago that the extreme weather conditions and indeed climate change may be having an effect.
Absolutely. Well, longer term populations show that butterflies have declined by 76% over since. So that's a long term decline.
Oh dear. I think we may have a slight problem with the line. Either that or Dr. Randall is very good at holding a straight face. We will try and re-establish the link in just a second, but clearly there are issues with the butterfly population. Let's have a quick look and see what we can see. Now, another story we can turn our attention to. Look away now if you haven't had your breakfast. If you're thinking of heading for a run or heading to the gym this morning, see if you can do better than this lot. 8 athletes from different countries have put their stamina and, frankly, their sanity to the test by swimming around 70 kilometres across a near-freezing Russian lake, as you can see, without even the benefit of a dry suit. The swimmers spent a total of 26 hours in the water and said they had originally planned a 120-kilometre relay. But the unusually cold water meant that they had to cut their distance. Let's see if we can turn our attention to the weather domestically. Naz is standing by.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. High pressure is building in and temperatures are on their way up for the rest of this week. We could see temperature highs of 30 to 31 degrees Celsius, and it will be the first time this year, and in fact, since September 2020, that we've seen temperatures around 30 degrees Celsius or more. This late in the season is a little unusual. The last time we had it late in July, a temperature of 30 or more, was back in 2014. So to begin with, we are seeing lots of sunshine out there and it's a mild start already, but not all areas will experience the sunshine and warmth throughout the rest of this week. In fact, for the northwest of Scotland this morning, it's cloudy, it's murky, there's some patchy light rain and drizzle there. Fair amount of clouds still across parts of Ireland and Northern Ireland, particularly to the northwest, and over towards parts of East Anglia, the east of Kent. Once again, a fairly cloudy and murky morning with a bit of drizzle likely too. But all of that mostly clears away into this afternoon, revealing lots of sunshine for most places for later today. It will be feeling very warm, particularly across central southwestern parts where we're likely to see the highest temperatures with light winds and lots of sunshine. We could see highs locally of 27 to 28 degrees Celsius, but widely into the early to the mid-20s for many parts, with plenty of sunshine, except across northwest Scotland. Staying cloudy and cool there for much of today, with still the risk of some drizzle. Tonight, it stays cloudy across the northwest of Scotland, still some drizzle and murky conditions there. A bit of cloud also drifting in across parts of Northern Ireland, the northwest of the Republic, and around eastern parts of England too. But in between, it's mainly dry and clear and another mild night. Then heading on into the weekend. And for Saturday, sunny skies virtually everywhere. Another very warm day, particularly across parts of Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, down towards the southeast of England. Northwest Scotland, cloudy, cool and drizzly again. And Sunday is the day that we're likely to see highs of 30 to 31 degrees Celsius. Hot and sunny for the south, cool in the north.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.